The night air felt heavy as 16-year-old Nia stared out of her bedroom window, her thoughts lost in the rhythm of the storm that raged outside. The rain lashed against the windows with the ferocity of a wild animal. The low rumble of thunder echoed across the sky, shaking the walls of their modest home. Her parents were away for the weekend, a rare moment of solitude for Nia, who often found herself suffocated by her overprotective mother's constant surveillance. She was supposed to be enjoying the rare peace, but tonight was different. There was a sense of unease that settled deep within her chest, gnawing at her like a cold wind. The house, usually so full of noise and activity, was eerily quiet. Her parents' absence left a hollow space in the house, amplifying the sounds of the storm. A loud crack of thunder rattled the windows, and for a moment, Nia froze. She quickly dismissed it as nothing more than the weather. The house was old, creaky floors, narrow hallways, and rooms that seemed to swallow up the light. Nia had spent her entire life in this house, but tonight, the familiar place felt foreign, almost threatening. She shook the thought from her mind, rolling over onto her side and pulling the covers tight around her. It wasn't anything. Just nerves, she told herself. Her phone buzzed beside her, and she grabbed it, grateful for the distraction. A message from her best friend, Sasha, popped up on the screen. "Are you still alive in there?" Nia laughed softly and typed back, "Yeah, just trying to survive this storm. You know how my mom gets about the rain." Sasha's reply was almost immediate. "It's not just the rain, is it?" Nia frowned, her fingers hesitating over the keys. She knew exactly what Sasha was talking about. Lately, she had been feeling more than just the occasional hint of unease. There were nights when she thought she could hear footsteps around the house when no one was there. Odd sounds, like someone breathing in the dark, or the faint creak of the floorboards, even though no one had walked across them. She'd brushed it off as imagination, but lately, it had gotten harder to ignore. Her phone buzzed again. "I'll be back at your place in 20 minutes. Just hang tight." With a sigh, Nia slipped out of bed and made her way downstairs. The quiet of the house seemed suffocating, the only sounds being the soft tapping of her footsteps on the hardwood floors. She entered the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, the only thing that seemed to calm her nerves. As she turned to head back up to her room, she paused, her eyes drawn to the darkened hallway that led to the front door. The storm outside was relentless, but within the house, the air was thick, as if something was waiting. A noise, soft but distinct, echoed from the hallway. Nia froze, her heart pounding. She couldn't tell if it was just the wind, the house settling, or something else entirely. She strained her ears, listening. Then, the sound came again. A faint scratching at the door. Nia's pulse quickened, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. No one was supposed to be outside in this storm. Her parents had locked the doors before they left. She walked quietly to the front door, staring at it through the thin crack between the wall and the doorframe. She could feel her breath coming faster now. Something wasn't right. The sound of the scratching against the door seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Nia stood frozen, her heart thumping so loudly in her chest that it felt like it might burst. She slowly reached for the doorknob, her fingers trembling. The storm outside was deafening, the thunder booming as though it were preparing for something catastrophic. The wind howled, but the noise at the door, that scratching, it didn't belong. It was too precise, too deliberate. She swallowed hard and, with a deep breath, gripped the handle and turned it slightly. The door didn't budge. Another scratch. She let out a shaky breath, her mind racing. No one was supposed to be here. Her parents had made sure of that when they locked everything before leaving. Yet, somehow, someone, or something, was out there, trying to get in. Nia felt her pulse accelerate. She took a step back, her feet feeling like they were glued to the floor. Was it an animal? No. The sound was too methodical, too calculated. No creature would do this. Her thoughts flickered to the past, her parents' warnings, the strange things that had happened before. Was this connected to that? Just as she was about to pull away from the door, the sound came again, louder this time, like something, or someone, scraping along the wooden frame. It was too close now. Far too close. Nia's heart raced. She knew she had to act. Whatever it wasn't good. She felt an overwhelming urge to get out of sight. If it was a person, they wouldn't be able to get in if they didn't know she was here. But how could she hide? The front door was the most obvious point of entry. The windows were all locked. Her phone, she couldn't risk it. She couldn't risk making a sound. She darted into the living room, hurrying to the far corner where the curtains were drawn. The storm outside created an unnatural kind of darkness, even though it was only late afternoon. She crouched low, holding her breath, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She thought about locking herself in her room, but she quickly realized that the intruder would likely know she was there, hiding. And hiding didn't feel safe anymore. Her fingers gripped the edges of the couch, her knuckles white. She wished her parents would come home. She wished they had never left. 1,000 worst-case scenarios ran through her mind. What if the intruder had seen her through the window? What if they were already inside? The seconds felt like hours. Then, finally, there was silence. The scratching stopped. Nia didn't dare move. She stayed as still as possible, barely breathing. Time passed, but nothing happened. The sound of the storm outside seemed to drown out every other noise, and she allowed herself a brief moment of false relief. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Suddenly, a loud bang from the front door jolted Nia to her feet. Her eyes widened as she stared at the door, her mind not quite processing what had just happened. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had just tried to break in. She wasn't imagining this. Another bang followed, this time harder. The sound of wood splintering against the force. The intruder was getting inside. Nia didn't think. She ran. She dashed across the room, her feet pounding against the wooden floors. She could hear the sounds of the door shaking, the pressure of someone trying to force it open. She ran down the narrow hallway, heart hammering against her chest. She reached her room and slammed the door behind her, locking it as quickly as she could. The sudden rush of adrenaline made her hands shaky, but she wasn't going to stop. She backed away from the door, her breath coming fast and shallow. She leaned against the wall, eyes darting around her room. Everything felt like it was closing in on her. The window, she could try the window, she thought. She could climb out and escape. But before she could make a move, a new sound filled the silence, the sound of footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Moving steadily toward her room. She turned and rushed to her window, yanking it open with desperation. The rain poured down, and the wind almost knocked her back. She thought she could make it, she could climb out of the window, make it to the back alley, and run to a neighbor's house. But just as she was about to climb out, a shadow flickered at the door. Someone was outside her room. Someone who knew exactly where she was. Nia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The footsteps outside her door stopped, and for a moment, she thought she might have imagined them. But then, the doorknob rattled. A slow, deliberate turn. The lock on her bedroom door was weak, and she could feel the pressure of the intruder testing it. Her mind raced. Panic clawed at her throat, but she couldn't afford to panic now. The wind howled louder, making everything feel more isolated, more terrifying. She had to make a choice, climb out the window, or face whatever was coming for her. The door handle jiggled again. This time, it wasn't a mere test. The intruder was trying to break in. Nia's hand flew to her phone, but her thoughts scattered. She remembered too late that it was downstairs. She could hear nothing now except the terrifying silence of the house. The storm outside was deafening, but inside, everything was eerily still, except for that door. The doorknob kept rattling, harder this time, as if the person on the other side was growing more frustrated. They were close now. Too close. She backed away from the window and looked around her room. There had to be something, anything, that could help her defend herself. The dresser, the desk, the small lamp on the side table, all were useless in this situation. The only escape was the window, but what if the intruder was waiting for her to make that move? She couldn't risk it. She had no way of knowing how long it would take for help to arrive, or if anyone would come at all. The rattling stopped suddenly. Nia held her breath, every nerve in her body screaming at her to move, but her feet wouldn't respond. She wanted to scream for help, but her voice caught in her throat. Then, with a terrible crack, the door burst open. The lock gave way under the pressure, the door swinging wide with a sickening groan. Nia's eyes went wide as she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothes. The figure stood in the doorway. His face was hidden under a hoodie, casting a shadow over his features, but she could see his eyes. Cold, empty eyes that seemed to see right through her, and she could feel the weight of his gaze like a vice around her chest. Her breath caught in her throat, panic rising as the seconds dragged on. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, watching her. The storm raged outside, but the silence between them was almost deafening. Nia's mind spun, looking for any way out. She could try to run past him, dart down the hall, and hope for a chance. But the odds were slim. This man was blocking the door now, and if he heard her moving, it would be over. Then he spoke. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The words were low, almost whispered, but they struck her like a physical blow. His voice sent a chill through her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to do anything to escape, but her legs refused to move. She watched as he stepped into the room, each footfall heavy and deliberate, his eyes never leaving her. Nia tried to calm her breathing, tried to think, tried to plan. She reached for the nightstand drawer, but he was too close now, too fast. Before she could even react, the man lunged at her, grabbing her wrist in a grip like iron. The suddenness of his attack sent a shock through her, and she cried out in surprise. His grip tightened, pulling her toward him. She tried to fight back, her body trembling with fear, but he was too strong. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of his presence. Nia could feel the coldness of his touch, his fingers pressing into her skin, and she realized something: this wasn't just a random break-in. This wasn't about stealing anything. He was here for something else. Her mind raced, and her only thought was to survive. She had to get out of this. She had to fight back. In a split second, she brought her knee up, catching him off guard. He stumbled back, momentarily losing his grip on her. Nia didn't hesitate. She pushed him away, stumbling toward the window, her heart pounding in her ears. She couldn't wait for him to recover, she couldn't wait for him to close in on her again. She ran toward the window, scrambling for a way out. But before she could reach it, the man grabbed her arm once more. This time, his hold was like a vice, and Nia let out a gasp of pain as he yanked her back toward him. Her thoughts were spinning. There had to be a way out. She wasn't going to die in this room, not like this, not at the hands of someone who had no reason to hurt her, who had no business being here. She wasn't going to let him win. In the moment of desperation, a thought flashed across her mind: her phone. She could use it. If she could break free just long enough, maybe she could call for help. But she needed an opening. With every ounce of strength, she slammed her elbow back into the intruder's stomach, pushing him off just enough to break free. She bolted for the window, heart pounding, body shaking with adrenaline. She reached it, her fingers fumbling for the lock. It was stuck. No. Not now. She had no time to waste. She looked back over her shoulder. The man was on her again. Nia's fingers trembled as she desperately twisted the window lock. Her pulse raced like a drum in her ears, the sound of it drowning out everything else. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe, all she could feel was the weight of the situation closing in. She had to escape. If she didn't get out of that room, she didn't know what would happen next. The window lock wouldn't budge. Every twist, every frantic tug was futile. She could hear the man moving behind her, his footsteps getting closer, his breathing shallow but steady. She couldn't waste any more time. "Please," she whispered to herself, willing the window to open. "Come on. Come on." A cold chill swept through the room, and then, finally, with a loud click, the window released. Nia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't have to think twice. Without looking back, she yanked the window open and climbed out, squeezing through the narrow opening with everything she had. Her hands scraped against the rough brick, her heart thudding in her chest. She was almost free. Almost. Just as her feet hit the ground, a shout rang out from behind her. The man had followed. He was right behind her. Nia ran. The world around her became a blur of trees and darkness, the wind whipping through her hair, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't dare look back. She just ran, faster than she'd ever run before, feeling the panic in her legs, pushing her forward with an intensity she never thought she had. She couldn't believe she was running through the night, through the storm, with a man who was trying to hurt her just steps behind. The sounds of his pursuit were drowned by the rush of wind, but she could hear him, feel his presence even though she didn't dare look. The night was her enemy, and yet, it was her only chance. She needed to get to the street, to someone who could help. Her house was isolated. The nearest neighbor was a mile away. She had no choice but to go to the main road. Nia's legs burned, her breath ragged as she pushed on. The sound of his footsteps behind her grew louder. He was gaining on her. Faster, she urged herself. Keep going. A branch reached out and slapped her face, but she didn't care. She couldn't slow down. The darkness around her seemed to close in, and the cold air burned her lungs with each inhale, but she forced herself to keep going. She heard him then, a voice, shouting her name from the shadows. "You can't run forever, girl." His words sliced through the air, sending a chill down her spine. The road. She had to reach the road. But the man wasn't far behind, and in the stillness of the night, it was as if the entire world was holding its breath. The storm had begun to subside, and now, the only sound was the pounding of her heart and the thunderous rhythm of her steps. And then she saw it. The faint glow of a streetlight through the trees. Nia's legs burned with exhaustion, but she surged forward, determined to reach it. Just a little farther. She had to make it. She was so close. But as her foot hit the ground again, she felt something, someone, grab her from behind. A sharp cry left her lips as she was pulled off balance. She stumbled, falling to the ground, the wind knocked out of her. Before she could regain her bearings, the man was on top of her, his weight pressing down on her chest. He pinned her down with terrifying ease. "I told you," he hissed, "you can't escape." Nia gasped for air, panic clawing at her throat. He was too strong. Her movement slowed, the darkness around her closing in. She was going to die here. Right on this deserted stretch of road. But then, she felt it. The weight of his body shifted for just a moment, giving her the briefest opening. With every last ounce of strength, she threw an elbow backward, catching him in the ribs. He grunted in pain, but his grip didn't loosen. It was like trying to break free from a vice. Her mind raced. There was no way she could overpower him. But there was one thing left to try. Her hands searched frantically. And there it was, the gravel at her side. She grabbed a fistful, her fingers scraping as she pulled up a jagged stone. With all the strength she had left, she swung it up, catching him in the jaw. He yelped in surprise and pain, stumbling back just enough for Nia to scramble free. She didn't stop to look back. She didn't stop to check if he was following. She just ran, her legs, screaming, her body aching, but she ran. And then she saw it. The glow of headlights in the distance. A car. A chance. She pushed forward, her heart pounding with renewed hope.